So for this fourth Sunday of Advent, actually our theme is peace. You might notice it on the candle there. And I realize that this season I haven't talked about John the Baptist. Typically early on in Advent, we have readings from John the Baptist, who was coming to announce and prepare the way for the coming of the Messiah, for the coming of Jesus. And so our reading today is from Luke chapter, let me get the right page here, Luke chapter 1. And this is something that Zechariah says when John the Baptist is born. And so on one hand, it's about John the Baptist. But if you listen, you'll also hear words that talk about Jesus. Luke chapter 1, beginning with verse 76. And you, child, will be called the prophet of the Most High, for you'll go before the Lord to prepare his ways, to give knowledge of salvation to his people by the forgiveness of their sins. By the tender mercy of our God, the dawn from on high will break upon us, to give light to those who sit in darkness and in the shadow of death. They got our feet in the way of peace. Here is the reading. I began life in Texas, which is not in Canada. And so I'm one of those imports, immigrants or whatever. We've been here, about 12 and a half years. And almost immediately, I noticed that things were very different in Canada than they were in Texas. I had never had snow tires before in my life. I'd experienced one white Christmas when I was 3 years old, and we happened to be living kind of out in West Texas. All of our Christmases tend to be brown and occasionally green, and occasionally you can even go barefoot if we had a particularly warm Christmas. And so the weather was very different. Also, there was one of the things that surprised me is that when I went to someone's house, you always took off your shoes. It's like, we didn't worry about that in Texas. And then there's also little things like there's words that you say differently. My second car was a Mazda RX-7. Of course, y'all call it a Mazda. And there was also a Z28? Only it's a Z up here. Anyway, so there's different stuff. And when I was in seminary, I heard a Catholic priest his name was Virgilio Elizondo, and he was from Mexico, but had moved to San Antonio. And he was talking about how the future is mestizo, which is a Spanish word for mixed. In Mexico, there's like what's the word? The Spanish Mexicans, you might say, kind of that were more imported from Europe, and then there were the native Mexicans. And when they interbred, when they got married, they were called mestizo, which is they were mixed. Anyway, so he had written a book about this and was talking about it. And he just found something that just opened my eyes. He said that there in Mexico, the growing season, I would include southern Texas too, the growing season is very, very long. And so you may have heard it, they have a mañana kind of philosophy. Mañana means tomorrow. It's like, do we need to hurry and get the crops in and plant the seeds today? We can do it mañana. And it's so pervasive in the culture there. Like if they say you're going to start service at 11, around 11, whenever, it's like, what's the big deal about starting right on time? Well, my ancestors came from Germany. All four of my grandparents came from full-blooded Germans, so to speak. And that's kind of in Northern Europe. about the same latitude, I think, as Canada. And they came from a land where the growing season was not very long. And so if you didn't get your crops in early, in the right time, then you probably weren't going to get them harvested before the freezes came. So that meant your family might starve over the winter. And so the culture in Germany was not manana. It's like there's a schedule, we have to plan it out, we have to get in the ground on time or else. And so German Lutherans down there, if worship started at 11, it started at 11. If you said, if you're supposed to be at work at 9 o'clock, then you're supposed to be at work at 9 o'clock. If we're going to eat on Christmas Day at 3 o'clock, we're going to eat at 3 o'clock. That's how I was raised. And so it's very interesting then when my ancestors from Germany brought this good German order and structure and landed in southern Texas, where it's like manana. And I remember my grandparents just so frustrated. It's like whenever they tried to do things with our Hispanic friends, it's like they're always late. And it occurred to them like you can't depend upon them. But when Virgilio Elizondo talked about how where you're from gives your culture, and I thought about that, it just made so much sense. All those values and culture that were developed in Northern Europe for a reason, then got imported down to Texas where, for the Germans, it's like this is the way it's supposed to be. Only it really isn't as, it was foreign to that place. And so there was this kind of conflict. Now I'm talking about all this because we're living in a time where there is so much movement around the world, so much mixing of culture. I mean, you can really see it here in Calgary, and you can see it in this room. We have folks from Guyana and from China. I know we have some more Americans around someplace too. And so it's just like you have this mixing of cultures. And it's so easy to label something that's different from your own as wrong. It's like they're not doing it the right way. But once we recognize that it isn't wrong the way they manage their time, the food that they eat, the way that they live, it's just a different way of doing it. When we, instead of going about finding all the things that are wrong about how people are doing things, and instead just get curious to understand and even allow ourselves to appreciate it, then all of a sudden these strange ways of doing things actually help enliven and bring just wonderful beauty and diversity to our lives. I'm talking about all this because today is the way of peace. We celebrate the peace that God brought into the world, the peace that Jesus represented, the peace that was proclaimed, which at its very heart, the word, it's the word we use to capture the sense of shalom that's talked about all through the Old Testament. That's the Hebrew word for peace. And that sense of shalom is a sense of wholeness, of well-being, it's like the best of human community where everyone is included and everyone works together. That is really the vision of peace that Jesus represents. A place where instead of going around and judging and finding the differences and blaming people or whatever for them, instead assuming a posture of love, curiosity, and a desire to build relationships. This message of peace is just so critical now. It seems like there have been divisions in our society there have always been divisions. But especially since COVID, it seemed like everything just got ramped up. And there's some people are so quick to call people that think differently or do things differently from themselves, to label them as wrong. And being people of peace, being people who celebrate the coming of Christ into the world, we're called to be different. We're called to learn to love, called to find ways to accept, find ways to build relationships in peace. Myself and a few others that are in here, on Friday night, we're at a dinner. And I say, the way I say it, at a dinner with my Hizmet friends, Turkish Muslims. Every year before Christmas, they hold an event to do at least three things. One is to learn, they're just very curious about how we celebrate Christmas. So they like to get together with us during this Christmas time and learn about the story of Jesus. They know some of the story, but to learn how we celebrate. Let's see, what was the second thing? I had three of them. The most important one, though, really is they want to gather. They want to join us in the celebration, not just understand what we do, but actually to help to celebrate the birth of Jesus, because they acknowledge Jesus as one of the major prophets. But the real reason they want to get together is just to build relationships. They're part of what's called the Hizmet movement, which means service. That means they're about education, they're about providing for people's needs, but especially about breaking down the barriers between different faiths and different cultures. They're about building peace, and as my wife says, they're about world peace through friendship. Not a bad way to be about building peace. So on this day where we celebrate Zechariah's words about the coming Jesus, who is bringing light into the darkness, who's going to be bring peace into the world, I invite you also to step into that legacy. Be people of peace. Be people who look for ways to develop relationships. Look for ways to disable that kind of critique that we all have going in our minds of like, oh, that's not the right way. And just see if you can be curious. And see how often you can turn strangers into friends. Amen.